Things were about to get heated. Elon Musk, the mastermind behind Tesla, SpaceX, and now Twitter, was about to face off with one of television's sharpest and most sarcastic personalities, Jimmy Kimmel. The tension was in the air, and for good reason. These two men, with their contrasting worlds and bold personalities, were about to collide in a way no one could have anticipated. Elon Musk, billionaire, innovator, and let's face it, a man who never shied away from controversy, had always been a magnet for attention. From his groundbreaking work at Tesla, transforming the electric car industry, to sending humans to space with SpaceX, Musk had reshaped multiple industries. But his journey had been far from smooth. There were scandals, critiques, and bold decisions, like his acquisition of Twitter, that had many questioning his choices. Love him or hate him, Elon Musk was never boring. He was a man whose words and actions sparked debates across the world. The media either hailed him as a genius or crucified him for his latest stunts. But despite the backlash, one thing was clear. Musk thrived in the chaos, feeding off the attention and controversy. Then, there's Jimmy Kimmel, comedian, late-night talk show host, and the man who built a career on roasting celebrities and politicians alike. Kimmel had a reputation for being quick-witted, never afraid to poke fun at anyone, no matter how high their status. He was known for his biting humor and ability to turn a simple interview into something that could go viral in an instant. But Kimmel's charm was his balance. He could take jabs at his guests with a smile, but when needed, he could also be surprisingly kind and thoughtful. He wasn't just a talk show host. He was a cultural commentator, an entertainer, and above all, a man who loved a good challenge. But what happens when these two figures, each with their own flair for drama, find themselves in the same room? What happens when Kimmel's sharp tongue meets Musk's no-nonsense attitude? The stage was set for what would become an unforgettable showdown. As the audience settled in, the atmosphere thickened. Everyone knew that this wasn't just another celebrity interview. This was something else entirely. Musk's unpredictable nature paired with Kimmel's audacity promised fireworks. And when the lights dimmed and Kimmel walked on stage to introduce Musk, the anticipation was palpable. It was clear things were about to get heated and no one, not even Musk, knew what was going to happen next. Elon Musk and Jimmy Kimmel were two names that, in their own right, needed no introduction. But the idea of them together in the same room, on the same stage, that was a different story entirely. Let's start with Elon Musk. Born in South Africa, Musk's journey to becoming one of the most influential and divisive figures of the 21st century was nothing short of extraordinary. From a young age, his mind was always on the future. While many children were out playing, Musk was teaching himself computer programming, reading about rockets, and dreaming about Mars. Fast forward to the present, and he had not only founded companies like Tesla and SpaceX, but also revolutionized multiple industries. He didn't just dream about the future, he built it. And while his accomplishments were monumental, so too were his controversies. His tweet storms, sudden company decisions, and public persona often sparked debates. Whether he was sending rockets to space, shaking up the auto industry with electric vehicles, or purchasing Twitter in a very public and chaotic fashion, Musk was a figure who thrived on being in the headlines. And the world was always watching, waiting for the next big move, the next big tweet, the next big gamble. On the other hand, Jimmy Kimmel had built his own empire, but through a different path. Born in Brooklyn, Kimmel's early days didn't promise the stardom that would later come. He worked his way up in television, initially as a radio DJ and later making a name for himself as the host of The Man Show, a late-night comedy show known for its irreverent humor. Kimmel, with his dry wit and razor-sharp commentary, found his true home on Jimmy Kimmel Live, where he quickly became one of the most trusted voices in late-night television. But Kimmel's comedy wasn't just about throwing jabs at celebrities. He had an uncanny ability to make fun of people while still endearing them to the audience. Whether he was interviewing politicians, musicians, or Hollywood stars, Kimmel had a way of turning every conversation into an event. His show was a blend of laughs, insightful moments, and, of course, his signature roasting style. Now, these two men, one a tech billionaire who built the future, the other a late-night comedian who built a career on laughing at the present, were about to collide. and the world wasn't sure what to expect. Would Kimmel's sarcasm take down Musk's unshakable confidence? Or would Musk, the master of public spectacle, outshine the talk show host with his own brand of irreverence? As the cameras rolled, the stage was set for what promised to be a masterclass in tension. Jimmy Kimmel, standing at his desk with his signature grin, introduced Musk in his usual fashion, playful, but with just the right amount of edge. "Our next guest," Kimmel began, "is a man who doesn't need much of an introduction, though I'll give him one anyway. He's the CEO of Tesla, the founder of SpaceX, and, in case you missed it, the man who bought Twitter. Please welcome Elon Musk." The crowd erupted into applause, but Musk, with his usual composed demeanor, strode onto the stage with that ever-present, slightly aloof look. There was no surprise in his walk, no hint of nerves. Musk had been in the public eye for years, and this, for him, was just another stop along the way. But Kimmel, as always, was there to spice things up. "Welcome, Elon," Kimmel said, giving a quick nod. "So, you bought Twitter. Big move. I'm still trying to figure out how to buy a cup of coffee without getting a weird look. You, on the other hand, just casually dropping billions for an app where people argue about sandwiches. How's that going for you?" It was a joke, but the underlying question was there. Kimmel wasn't holding back. The audience chuckled, but there was an edge to the humor. Kimmel had made his move. The ball was in Musk's court now. How would he respond? With his usual cool detachment, Musk simply smirked, leaning into the question with a calculated nonchalance. "Well, I thought it could be a fun challenge," Musk replied, his voice steady. "Plus, I like to make sure that if I'm going to make an impact, I'm doing it everywhere, not just in space." Kimmel raised an eyebrow, sensing the opportunity for another jab. Right, because nothing says changing the world like controlling people's opinions on a platform that's been used for celebrity feuds and political rants. Musk, though, didn't flinch. He leaned back in his chair, giving a slight smile. "I like to think it's a bit more than that. People are allowed to have their opinions, and I'm just trying to make sure those opinions can be heard, whether you agree with them or not." The exchange had started off light, but already, the stakes were clear. Kimmel's humor was biting, and Musk wasn't here to back down. Each man was playing his role, but the real question was, who would get the last word? Would Kimmel push Musk to his limit, or would Musk's calm, calculated responses win the day? The energy in the room was palpable. The audience could feel the tension rising, like a slow burn. This wasn't just another late-night interview. This was something bigger, something that would keep everyone on the edge of their seats, waiting for what would happen next. The night was buzzing with anticipation, and the moment had finally arrived. The bright lights above the stage dimmed slightly, and a hush fell over the audience. The unmistakable music of Jimmy Kimmel Live began to play, the familiar upbeat theme signaling that the next guest was about to step into the spotlight. But tonight, this wasn't just any guest. This was Elon Musk. As the audience's applause began to rise, it wasn't just a typical late-night reception. There was something else in the air. Something charged, almost electric. Musk was, after all, no ordinary guest. He wasn't here to promote a movie, a book, or even a new product line. He was here as a force of nature. A billionaire entrepreneur who had changed the world with Tesla, pushed the boundaries of space travel with SpaceX, and recently made headlines for his controversial purchase of Twitter. It was an appearance that would spark conversations long after the cameras stopped rolling. Elon Musk's entrance was, as expected, confident. He walked onto the stage with the same cool demeanor that had defined his public persona for years. Dressed in his usual casual yet carefully chosen attire, a simple black jacket over a dark shirt, his hair slightly tousled, Musk exuded the quiet confidence of a man who had conquered nearly every industry he had touched. His presence alone commanded attention, the type of attention that didn't need to be earned. It was given automatically the moment he stepped into a room. There was no fanfare, no extravagant gestures, just a slight smile and a wave to the audience. Yet the crowd erupted into applause, as if they couldn't help but cheer for the man who had made a name for himself by being unpredictable, by challenging the status quo, and by doing what others said couldn't be done. People had either embraced Musk as a visionary or criticized him for his unconventional approach to business and life. But tonight, in this very moment, everyone was in awe, and you could feel the weight of it hanging in the air. Musk sat down across from Kimmel, his posture relaxed, though his piercing gaze never seemed to soften. He was a man who knew he was in control, but he also knew that Kimmel had the power to stir up something more. It was an interesting dynamic, one that only heightened the anticipation. Kimmel, as always, was the master of making even the most powerful guests feel a little uncomfortable, a little exposed. Musk had spent years fielding questions about electric cars, rockets, and artificial intelligence, but this was different. This wasn't an interview about his businesses or his ideas. This was a conversation with someone who loved to poke at the world's most untouchable figures, and he wasn't about to hold back. The crowd's energy shifted slightly as the initial wave of applause faded, replaced by a quiet expectancy. Kimmel adjusted his glasses with a smirk, clearly ready to dive in. The moment felt charged, as if everything they were about to say would hang in the balance, like every word was being carefully calculated. Musk didn't flinch. He sat back, his expression unreadable, but his eyes glimmered with a hint of curiosity, as if he were just waiting for Kimmel's first shot. Kimmel wasted no time. "So, Elon, let me start with the obvious," he said, a playful gleam in his eye. "You've done a lot in your career, built a few things. I mean, you've got Tesla, SpaceX, and, well, Twitter now. But I've got to ask, you ever think I've done enough?" Musk's lips curled into a small, knowing smile. It was the kind of smile you get when someone asks you a question that seems simple on the surface, but you know it's loaded with more meaning. He looked at Kimmel, then back at the audience before responding. "Honestly, not really. I always think there's more to do. There's a lot of challenges out there, and if you stop trying to tackle them, you're just coasting." "I'm not really into coasting." Kimmel chuckled, not missing a beat. Right. So no retirement plans for you, huh? I mean, I can't imagine a world where Elon Musk is just sipping cocktails on a beach somewhere. That seems against your brand." The audience laughed, but Musk didn't break. He was used to this kind of humor, the type that might make others squirm, but Musk took it all in stride. "I mean, I enjoy a good vacation every now and then, but there's always something that needs fixing. If you want to change the world, you have to keep pushing." This was classic Musk. Always on the move, always thinking of the next big thing. And yet, there was a cool detachment to his words, a sense that he'd said this many times before, like a mantra he lived by. But Kimmel wasn't about to let it slide that easily. "So, if you're not coasting," Kimmel continued, leaning in with mock seriousness, "how do you find the time to manage all of this? You've got rockets going to space, cars driving themselves, and now Twitter. Is there, like, a Musk algorithm for getting everything done, or are you just naturally this intense?" Musk chuckled, but there was a slight twinkle in his eye, a look that said, "I'm not afraid to dive deeper if I have to. I just focus on what matters," he replied. "You can't do everything, but you can focus on the things that will have the biggest impact. And that's what drives me. You've got to figure out where you can make the most difference." Kimmel nodded, leaning back in his chair. The audience was captivated, hanging on every word. There was a subtle but unmistakable shift in the tone of the conversation. What started as a playful jab had transformed into a more profound discussion, one that dug into Musk's psyche. But Kimmel wasn't done yet. He was still holding his cards close, waiting for the right moment to press further. The stage had been set. The chemistry between the two men was palpable. Musk's calm, collected responses contrasted with Kimmel's energetic, biting humor, but it was clear that the real fun had only just begun. The audience could sense it too. The energy in the room had changed. The tension was rising. And with every word exchanged, the anticipation grew for what was coming next. The temperature in the room seemed to rise with each passing minute. What had begun as a seemingly innocent back and forth between Jimmy Kimmel and Elon Musk was quickly transforming into something much more intense. The laughter from the audience had quieted, replaced by an air of tension, as if everyone present knew they were witnessing a moment that could shift into something unforgettable at any moment. Kimmel, ever the master of turning up the heat, wasn't about to let the conversation settle too easily. He'd been waiting for a chance, a crack in Musk's calm exterior, to push the billionaire into unfamiliar territory. Kimmel knew how to play his guests, how to poke and prod until something real emerged. But he wasn't the only one playing the game. Musk, for all his cool detachment, wasn't oblivious. He could feel the shift. He could sense Kimmel's growing desire to go deeper, to see if he could get a reaction. Musk had been here before, though, on social media, in boardrooms, in interviews. He knew how to keep his composure when the heat was on. Still, the question started to change. Kimmel's jabs became less playful, more pointed, as he sensed a change in the dynamic. Okay, Elon, you've got rockets going to space and electric cars on the road. You've built these empires and people love you, or they love to hate you, depending on the day, Kimmel said with a grin. But let's talk about Twitter. You bought it. You made all these big promises about free speech, but here we are a few months later. What's going on over there? Is Twitter really better under your rule, or is it just more chaos? The word chaos hung in the air like a challenge, and Musk didn't flinch. He had heard this question more times than he could count, and he had his answer ready. But the way Kimmel asked it, with just enough bite to it, was different. It was a test, one that Musk would either pass or fail in front of millions. Well, Jimmy, Musk began, his voice steady, Twitter is a platform that was facing a lot of issues before I bought it. It was running into problems with free speech, misinformation, and censorship. My goal wasn't to just buy an app for fun. It was to make sure that people could have open discussions. Is it perfect? No. But we're working on it. Kimmel, sensing an opening, pushed harder. But don't you think you, with all your power, your billions, might just be another layer of control? I mean, who's really getting a voice here? The average person? Or the one guy who seems to have more opinions than anyone else on Earth? Musk's jaw tightened ever so slightly. He could feel Kimmel's words pushing into territory he'd worked so hard to navigate. The billionaire had fought for years to make his mark in industries where control was something others wielded against him. But now, here he was being painted as the one who could very well be doing the same thing to others. It was a challenge he wasn't about to back down from. That's the thing, Jimmy, Musk responded, leaning forward slightly. I don't see it that way. I'm not trying to control anyone. If anything, I'm trying to break down the barriers that other people have built. I want people to be able to speak their minds, without fear of being silenced because of a one-size-fits-all approach. The room was growing quieter now. The audience, once caught up in the banter, was beginning to realize that this conversation was evolving into something deeper. What had started as a casual exchange about Twitter was now becoming a debate about power, freedom, and influence. Kimmel, knowing how to stoke the flames, wasn't about to let Musk have the last word so easily. You're right, though, Kimmel said with a teasing smile. You're the free speech champion now. But you've also fired people. You've made sudden changes that have left a lot of people scratching their heads. Some people might say your idea of free speech isn't really that free at all. Musk raised an eyebrow, his calm expression betraying no sign of annoyance, but his voice dropped just a little, as if he were honing in on Kimmel's words with a razor-sharp focus. The thing is, Jimmy, change isn't always comfortable. Sometimes it's messy, sometimes it's hard. But if you want to move forward, you have to be willing to make tough decisions. Kimmel didn't miss a beat. Tough decisions, huh? Well, some people might call it reckless. And when you're at the helm of something as big as Twitter, those decisions impact a lot of people. Musk's eyes narrowed just slightly. It was a small shift, but it was there. He wasn't just here for casual chat. He was defending his vision, and that vision wasn't always popular. You can call it reckless, Musk said, his voice steady but firm. Or you can call it necessary. I'd rather be remembered for making bold moves than for sitting around playing it safe. The tension in the room was palpable. Kimmel's smile was still there, but it had a hint of something more. This wasn't just a friendly jab anymore. It had escalated. The back and forth was no longer a game of playful insults. This was an ideological clash, a battle of perspectives. Kimmel had thrown Musk into a corner, but Musk wasn't backing down. In fact, he was leaning into it almost as if he were daring Kimmel to press harder. And Kimmel did. All right, Elon, I get it. Bold moves, change, progress. But let's talk about something else. You've had your fair share of controversies, right? Twitter's one thing, but I've seen you in the middle of some Twitter wars, calling people out, calling it like it is. Do you ever stop and think, maybe I should keep quiet for once? Or is that just not your style? It was a question Musk had faced before, and yet, it always seemed to hit differently each time. It was personal now. Kimmel was getting to the core of Musk's public persona, the part that often alienated people, the part that made him so unpredictable. I don't think there's ever a right time to stop speaking your mind, Musk answered, his tone deliberate, even as the audience leaned in, eager to see how he would handle the question. I've never been one to censor myself, and I don't plan to start now. The heat in the room had officially escalated. What was once a simple late-night interview had turned into a full-blown clash of ideals, of worldviews. Musk's unyielding drive for progress and Kimmel's sharp critiques were clashing in real time, and it was clear that neither man was about to back down. The audience could feel it now, the sense that something big was unfolding before them. The heat was rising, and it wasn't going to cool down anytime soon. The air in the studio was thick with tension, the kind of tension that builds right before something significant happens. The back and forth between Jimmy Kimmel and Elon Musk had reached a boiling point, the sharp edges of their personalities clashing in a way that felt as if the entire room was holding its breath, waiting for the spark that would set it all off. What started as a playful interview had transformed into a full-scale ideological battleground, and there was no turning back now. Kimmel, ever the provocateur, leaned forward in his chair, a mischievous glint in his eye. He knew he had Musk exactly where he wanted him, on the edge of a moment, where all of the billionaire's usual poise and composure would be tested. But Musk wasn't fazed. If anything, he seemed more focused than ever, his jaw clenched, his gaze unwavering. He was a man used to the heat, the kind of heat that came with being one of the most high-profile figures on the planet. But this was different. This was Kimmel, a master of drawing out even the most guarded of guests, and tonight, he wasn't holding back. Kimmel, ever the provocateur, leaned forward in his chair, a mischievous glint in his eye. He knew he had Musk exactly where he wanted him, on the edge of a moment, where all of the billionaire's usual poise and composure would be tested. But Musk wasn't fazed. If anything, he seemed more focused than ever, his jaw clenched, his gaze unwavering. He was a man used to the heat, the kind of heat that came with being one of the most high-profile figures on the planet. But this was different. This was Kimmel, a master of drawing out even the most guarded of guests, and tonight, he wasn't holding back. The audience, sensing the shift, grew quieter, their collective attention riveted to the stage. This wasn't just entertainment anymore. This was a moment of true confrontation, one that would leave a lasting impression. The stakes were high, and everyone in that room knew it. Kimmel didn't hesitate. All right, Elon, he began, his voice a touch more serious now, the playful tone of earlier gone. We've been dancing around this for a while. But let's get down to it. You've done some pretty controversial things. You've bought Twitter, you've fired a ton of people, and you've made headlines for your, let's say, unique approach to leadership. Do you ever stop and think, maybe I've taken it too far? Musk's eyes flickered for a brief moment, but his expression remained steady. It was clear that Kimmel had found his soft spot, and he wasn't going to let go. The question was pointed, personal even, and it was designed to get a rise out of Musk. But Musk, ever the strategist, wasn't going to let it shake him. Instead, he leaned forward slightly, his tone deliberate, as if choosing his words with care. Jimmy, I've never been afraid to take risks, Musk said, his voice unwavering. Whether it's launching a car into space or buying a platform that's been struggling with its identity. I believe in the long-term vision, even if the short-term is uncomfortable. And yes, I've made decisions that have rattled people. But the goal is to move things forward, to break free from the old way of doing things. The audience was hanging on his every word now. There was something magnetic about Musk's conviction, something that made you believe, Even for a moment, that maybe, just maybe, he was onto something bigger than any of them realized. But Kimmel wasn't buying it. He had heard these kinds of speeches before, the grand declarations of visionaries who were willing to bulldoze anything and anyone in their way. He wasn't about to let Musk off the hook so easily. And what about the people who aren't buying it? Kimmel pressed, his voice sharp. What about the employees who lost their jobs? The users who feel like the platforms become more of a circus than a place for meaningful conversation? Are you just going to keep telling them they're wrong? Musk's gaze hardened, but he didn't raise his voice. There was an edge to his calmness now, as if he were gearing up for the final round of this verbal sparring match. You can't make progress without shaking things up. If you only listen to the people who want things to stay the same, you'll never move forward. Change is messy, and sometimes people get hurt. But the alternative is stagnation. And I'm not here for stagnation. Kimmel leaned back in his chair, his expression a mix of disbelief and amusement. Right. So, you're saying that wrecking everything is the price of progress. I'm saying that real progress requires risk, Musk shot back, his voice growing more intense. The things we're trying to do aren't easy. People who play it safe are the ones who end up stuck. I'm not here to play it safe. The room was silent for a brief moment, as if the audience, too, was weighing Musk's words. There was something almost hypnotic about his passion, the raw intensity with which he believed in his vision. Yet there was a part of Kimmel that wasn't convinced. The comedian in him wanted to push further, wanted to see how far Musk was willing to go before the cracks started showing. So, you're really willing to just keep bulldozing through, regardless of who gets run over in the process? Kimmel asked, a hint of sarcasm creeping into his voice. That's your idea of progress? Because, Elon, there's a lot of people who would argue that maybe it's not all about you. Musk's eyes flashed for a split second, and it was clear that Kimmel had struck a nerve. The billionaire wasn't used to being questioned so directly, not in this way. But he was quick to recover. This isn't about me. This is about creating a future where we don't just follow the status quo. It's about challenging the system. If you're going to do something big, you have to expect resistance. And that's exactly what I'm getting. But it won't stop me. The audience was absolutely riveted now, caught in the middle of this epic clash of personalities. Kimmel, the man who had spent years making fun of the powerful, was facing off against Musk, the man who had built an empire on challenging the impossible. The energy in the room had reached a fever pitch, the stakes higher than anyone had expected when the interview had begun. But Kimmel wasn't finished. He had one final question to throw at Musk, something that would cut through the bravado and bring the whole conversation to a head. And what about your critics? Kimmel asked, his voice lowering slightly, though still charged with tension. The people who call you a mad genius, who say you're out of touch with reality. What do you say to them? Musk's expression darkened, but there was no anger in his voice. Only a quiet, calculated response. I say that they'll understand in time. You don't change the world by playing by the same rules everyone else follows. You change it by breaking the rules and creating something new. Whether people see that now or later, I'm okay with that. History will decide what was right. The silence that followed was deafening. It wasn't just a moment of confrontation. It was a declaration, an admission of the personal and professional cost that Musk was willing to endure to see his vision through. The stakes of this interview had shifted once more. It was no longer just a conversation. It was a showdown, a moment where the collision of egos, ideas, and ambitions left everyone in that room on edge, unsure of what would happen next, but certain that nothing would be the same after it was over. The heat had reached its peak, and now, it was anyone's guess how it would all end. The room, once crackling with the heat of an intense showdown, seemed to pause. The tension that had thickened the air now hung heavily over the entire studio, the weight of the conversation pressing down on everyone present. Musk and Kimmel, locked in their verbal sparring, had pushed each other to the limits. Yet there was something undeniable in the air. Something was about to change. Musk had been unwavering in his belief that he was right, that the disruptions he had caused were necessary for progress, no matter the collateral damage. But even he knew that Kimmel, with his sharp wit and ability to challenge, had thrown him off his usual rhythm. The laughter and playful exchanges of earlier were long gone. Now, the world was watching two powerful figures clash in real time. Kimmel, sensing the growing exhaustion in the air, leaned back in his chair, his posture softening ever so slightly. The usual sarcasm in his voice was gone, replaced by a rare seriousness that caught even Musk off guard. "Look, Elon," Kimmel began, his tone softer, almost conversational. "I know you're a guy who wants to change things. You've got a vision, no doubt about it. But sometimes, I can't help but wonder, what's the cost of all this? Are we just walking into chaos for the sake of some grand experiment?" For a moment, Musk didn't respond. The question had hit him in a way that none of Kimmel's previous jabs had. It wasn't a challenge to his ideas, it was a challenge to his heart. It was as if Kimmel was asking him to consider the humanity behind the moves he had made. Musk's gaze shifted, almost imperceptibly, as he seemed to take a step back from the battle. It was rare for Musk to pause like this, to show vulnerability, but something in Kimmel's question had reached him. Perhaps it was the way Kimmel had phrased it, not as an attack but as a genuine inquiry. Perhaps it was the exhaustion of the argument itself, the realization that, no matter how many times he had defended his vision, there was still a part of him that wondered if it was all worth it. Musk took a slow breath before answering, his voice quieter than before. "I don't know," he said, the words almost coming out reluctantly. "I've always believed that if you're not challenging the status quo, you're not doing enough. But sometimes I wonder if I'm pushing too hard, too fast. If the people who are caught in the middle of all this are paying a price that's too high." It was a rare admission from the billionaire, whose confidence in his actions had always been his armor. But in that moment, sitting across from Kimmel, he allowed himself to acknowledge the uncertainty that gnawed at him, something he rarely, if ever, did. Kimmel, sensing the shift, didn't press him further. Instead, he offered a smile, one that was far gentler than the usual sarcastic grin that accompanied his jabs. "You're human, Elon. I think that's something people forget sometimes. And maybe that's okay. Maybe you're not supposed to have all the answers, but you're still out here trying to make a difference. That's more than most people can say." For a brief moment, it felt like the walls between the two men had come down. Musk, usually so guarded, relaxed just a little. The tension that had been suffocating the room dissipated, replaced by a quiet understanding, a shared acknowledgement that sometimes, even the greatest minds wrestled with doubt. The audience, too, seemed to feel the shift. The unease that had pervaded the studio seemed to ease, and for the first time since the interview began, there was a sense of calm. It wasn't the fiery, confrontational interview that everyone had expected. Instead, it had become something more profound, an honest exchange, a moment of vulnerability amidst the public persona. Kimmel, with his usual self-awareness, broke the silence with a chuckle. "Well, look at that," he said, his tone lightening once again. "We've got ourselves a real human being here after all. Who would have thought?" Musk chuckled as well, a small, wry smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. The briefest of moments, but it was enough to reset the entire conversation. What had been an all-out battle was now turning into a dialogue. No longer a relentless attack, Kimmel had done what no one else had. He had allowed Musk the space to reflect, to question his own actions. And Musk, for the first time in a long while, let down his guard enough to admit that maybe, just maybe, he didn't have it all figured out. The turning point had arrived, but it wasn't defined by some explosive outburst or a dramatic statement. It was in the quiet moment between two people who, for a fleeting second, let go of their roles as adversary and guest. They were simply two individuals, sitting across from each other, navigating the complexity of being human. And just like that, the interview had taken on a new dimension, a conversation about the price of ambition, the toll of leadership, and the struggle between vision and humanity. The audience, once on edge, now felt a sense of resolution, a realization that the story they were witnessing wasn't just about a billionaire and a late-night host. It was about two people who, in that moment, had found a common ground amidst the noise. The heat had subsided, replaced by something quieter, but no less powerful. The turning point wasn't in the battle, it was in the pause, the brief surrender to reflection. And for the first time that night, both Musk and Kimmel were no longer just playing their roles. They were just two people, caught in the complexity of the world they were both trying to navigate. The atmosphere in the studio was electric, but now it was charged with a sense of anticipation, the kind that comes just before something monumental. The turning point had passed, but the stakes of this interview had only grown higher. What had started as a clash of egos, of personalities and ambitions, had shifted into something more complicated, a dance between truth and spectacle, a battle not just of ideas, but of hearts, of humanity. Musk sat a little straighter in his chair, the weight of the moment settling into his bones. It was as if, for the first time since he'd walked into the studio, he realized that he wasn't just defending his vision anymore. The real battle wasn't about the future of his companies or his grand ambitions. It was about the cost of it all, the personal toll that weighed on him more heavily than any of his achievements. It was about the people he was leaving behind, the sacrifices he had made along the way. The vulnerability he had allowed to surface earlier was still there, but now it was paired with something else, a sense of resolve, a determination to keep pushing forward, no matter what. Kimmel, sensing the shift, decided to press. He could feel that the tide had turned, and if he didn't act now, this rare opportunity for something real, something human, might slip away. Elon, Kimmel began, his voice quieter, almost thoughtful. You've talked a lot about the bigger picture, the future of humanity, the next big thing. But tell me this, what about now? What about the people who are part of your world right now? You've made decisions that have hurt people. Can you really say that you're okay with that? With the damage that's been done? Musk didn't flinch. Instead, he met Kimmel's gaze with a steady look, his jaw tight. I'm not here to make friends. I'm here to change things, he said, his voice low but firm. I'm not trying to hurt anyone, but sometimes change comes with a cost. Progress is never easy. If you want to build something that lasts, something that's going to make a real difference, you can't avoid the tough decisions. You can't worry about who you upset along the way. Kimmel's eyes narrowed slightly. This wasn't the answer he was hoping for, not exactly. It was the answer he had expected, the one that Musk always gave, the one that justified everything he did, no matter the fallout. But this time, Kimmel wasn't backing down. He leaned forward, his voice taking on a sharper edge. And what about the people who have to deal with that fallout? The ones who don't get to sit in your mansion or fly your private jets? The ones who are just trying to make ends meet while you're out here changing the world? What do you say to them? There was a brief silence. Musk's expression didn't waver, but there was a flicker in his eyes, something that was more than just the usual fire. It was doubt. It was the realization that, in his quest to change the world, he had indeed left many behind. And it wasn't just the employees who had been fired, the millions of dollars in cuts, the backlash from his decisions. It was the personal toll, the isolation, the inability to truly connect with people who didn't see the world the way he did. But then, just as quickly as the moment of doubt appeared, Musk swallowed it back. I've never said it's been easy, he replied, his voice steady once more, though there was a certain edge to it. But I can't be distracted by the noise. I have a vision, and I have to see it through. The people who are with me, who understand what I'm doing, they'll be there in the end. The rest? They'll either catch up, or they won't. I can't control that. Kimmel paused, studying Musk. It was clear that Musk was still in defense mode, still holding on to the belief that his vision justified the way he moved through the world. But Kimmel could see the cracks, see the small moments where the billionaire allowed himself to feel the weight of his choices. There was something human behind the fortress of self-assurance, something that Kimmel wasn't going to let go of. Maybe you can't control it, Elon, Kimmel said softly, his voice almost a whisper. But don't you think it's worth considering? Don't you think it's worth looking at the people who you've left behind and asking yourself if this is really the world you want to create? Because at the end of the day, if you win everything but lose the people around you, what do you have left? For the first time in the interview, Musk hesitated. The words hit harder than he expected, digging into a place he wasn't used to letting people see. It wasn't the criticism of his work or his vision that unsettled him. It was the suggestion that perhaps, just maybe, He had overlooked the human cost of his ambition. For all of his grand ideas and futuristic dreams, there was a real world, with real people who were affected by every decision he made. And in that moment, Musk felt a flicker of something he rarely allowed himself to feel: regret. It didn't last long, but it was enough. Enough for Musk to realize that maybe Kimmel wasn't just another late-night host, trying to get a rise out of him for the sake of entertainment. Maybe, just maybe, Kimmel had a point. Maybe he had been so wrapped up in his vision that he hadn't fully considered the consequences. Maybe the world he was trying to create wasn't just about rockets and cars and social media. It was about the people he was leaving behind. For a moment, the air in the studio shifted. It was no longer about a battle of egos or a clash of personalities. It was about something far deeper, a recognition that even the most powerful people are human, that even they are susceptible to doubt, to fear, and to regret. And in that moment, the audience saw something they hadn't seen before, a side of Musk that was real, raw, and unguarded.
Kimmel, too, saw it.
And for the first time that night, he let the moment breathe, allowing the gravity of their exchange to settle. The fight wasn't over. There was still much to discuss, but something fundamental had shifted. This wasn't just a late-night interview. It was a confrontation of ideals, a clash between two men trying to make sense of their place in the world. The room, once buzzing with tension, was now still. The final act was unfolding, and both Musk and Kimmel knew that whatever happened next, it would define the entire interview. This was the climax, the turning point where the personal and the public collided, and the moment where the truth, no matter how uncomfortable, had finally begun to surface. The tension that had once filled the room now lingered in the air like the quiet after a storm. Both men sat across from each other, the battle of words finally giving way to silence. It was as if the conversation had reached its natural conclusion, each of them now aware of the weight of their words, the consequences of their actions. The audience, who had been on the edge of their seats, could feel it too. The moment of resolution had arrived. Musk, who had been so guarded and firm throughout the interview, now looked almost human. The armor that he wore so confidently earlier had been chipped away piece by piece, revealing a side of him that very few ever got to see. The doubts that had flickered in his eyes just moments ago were still there, but now they seemed more like a realization than an uncertainty. The weight of what he had said, of the things he had been forced to confront, hung over him like a heavy cloak. It wasn't just about progress or innovation anymore. It was about the real people who were impacted by his decisions. And for the first time in this entire interview, he allowed himself to acknowledge that Kimmel, too, had let down his guard. His usual sharp tongue, the sarcastic humor that had defined much of the conversation, had softened. His words, which had once been pointed and direct, now carried a tone of understanding, of empathy. He wasn't just a late-night host anymore. In this moment, he had become something more, a bridge between Musk and the audience, someone who had, in his own way, helped Musk realize the humanity behind the headlines. The two men sat there, each reflecting on the exchange, on what had been said, and what had remained unsaid. The audience could feel the shift. There was no winner here, no clear victor in this intellectual battle. What had emerged was something far more important, a deeper understanding between two people who, despite their differences, shared a common humanity. Musk finally broke the silence, his voice quieter now, but still unmistakably Musk. "I don't have all the answers," he said, his gaze dropping for a moment before meeting Kimmel's. "I never claimed to. I've always been more focused on the future, on what's next. But maybe I need to start paying more attention to the present, to the people who are part of this journey with me." Kimmel nodded, his face softening. "You don't have to have all the answers, Elon. But I think acknowledging the impact you've had on the world and the people around you, that's a step in the right direction." There was a brief pause, and for a moment, it almost felt like the world outside the studio had disappeared. There was no audience, no cameras, just two men, sitting across from each other, processing the conversation they had just shared. It was a moment of vulnerability, of honesty, and perhaps even of growth. The host then leaned back in his chair, breaking the tension with a small chuckle. Well, Kimmel said, glancing at Musk with a playful grin, I think we've made history tonight. Not sure if the world will change because of it, but hey, at least we can say we had one hell of a conversation. Musk smiled back, his usual smirk returning, but this time it was different. Less smug, more genuine. Yeah, maybe, he replied. But sometimes that's all it takes, right? A conversation. And with that, the room seemed to breathe again, the weight of the moment easing away. The fight had ended, not in the explosive manner everyone had expected, but with a quiet, introspective resolution. The lines between them had blurred, and what had started as a confrontation had evolved into something far more meaningful. As the cameras rolled, capturing the final moments of their exchange, there was a sense of closure, a feeling that both men had walked away from this interview not just as adversaries, but as two individuals who, despite their differences, had found some common ground. The audience, once poised to witness a fiery clash, now sat in stunned silence, processing what they had just witnessed. It wasn't the showdown they had been promised, but it was something deeper, something more authentic. In a world where the loudest voices often drown out the most important messages, this was a rare instance where two people had allowed themselves to truly listen to each other. And for that, the world outside could wait. For now, the resolution was enough. As the final moments of the interview lingered, the once heated atmosphere now felt light, almost serene. The intensity of the past hour had given way to a rare kind of understanding, one that didn't need grand gestures or flashy declarations to make its point. The cameras, which had captured every tense exchange, every pause, now seemed almost secondary to what had just unfolded. What had started as a viral showdown, the clash of two powerful personalities, had ended in something far more meaningful, a quiet resolution that would resonate long after the studio lights dimmed. Elon Musk, the visionary billionaire who had made headlines countless times for his daring ambitions, for his vision of a future driven by technology, stood up from his chair. His typical confidence was still there, but it was tempered now with something more grounded, more human. His smile, though faint, was genuine as he glanced at Kimmel. Musk had always been known for his bold ideas and unwavering focus on the future. But tonight, he had let the present, the moment, speak louder than the next big invention. For all the promises of space exploration and artificial intelligence, the truth was clear in that room. Sometimes, the most significant breakthroughs were the ones that happened within oneself. Kimmel, ever the entertainer, had steered the conversation with his usual mix of humor and insight. But even he couldn't deny the transformation that had unfolded. Behind the jokes, the jabs, and the playful banter, there had been something real, a connection. A moment where two people who had always been divided by their public personas found a space to understand each other. Kimmel had pushed, yes, but he had also listened. And in doing so, he had helped Musk confront a side of himself that the world rarely saw. The part of him that carried the weight of his decisions, the part that, for all his accomplishments, had questions too. The audience, once prepared for a spectacle, now sat in awe of the unexpected turn the conversation had taken. It wasn't about who had won or lost. It was about something deeper, a quiet exchange that showed that even the most successful, the most powerful, were not immune to doubt, to introspection, to change. And perhaps in that there was hope for all of us. That even in the heat of conflict, there could be moments of understanding, moments that reminded us that we were all just people trying to figure things out. As the camera zoomed out, the studio lights softened, and the audience's applause was a mixture of appreciation and relief. It wasn't the explosive showdown they had expected, but in the end, it was something better. It was real. And that, in a world driven by entertainment, by drama, and by spectacle, was more than enough. Elon Musk and Jimmy Kimmel had started their evening as adversaries, two men who lived in entirely different worlds. But by the end of the night, they had shared something rare, a conversation that didn't need to be won, but simply experienced. For both of them, it had been a reminder that sometimes the most important discussions weren't the ones that made the headlines, but the ones that made them and everyone else take a step back and think. And as the credits rolled, the question hung in the air. What happens when the loudest voices in the room are willing to listen? Maybe, just maybe, that's the kind of change the world needs most.